You walk into Madison Square Garden in New York City, expecting a boxing match or a patriotic rally. Instead, you see 20,000 people, American flags everywhere, and swastikas hanging beside George Washington. On the stage, uniformed men salute a portrait of the first president of the United States as if he were an honorary Führer. You are not in Berlin 1939. You are in the heart of the United States, watching American Nazis try to rewrite what it means to be patriotic. This is the story of when Nazism tried to rise in America, how far it got, and why most people never hear about it today. You grow up believing that fascism was something foreign, something that happened over there. But if you rewind to the early 20th century, you find the soil in the United States was not as immune as you thought. After World War I, the country is full of anger and anxiety, economic swings, rapid immigration, racial tensions. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan are already marching in white robes, preaching white supremacy and fear of Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. Radios spread voices faster than ever, and conspiracy theories start to sound like truth to people who feel left behind. You don't yet see swastikas, but you see something else, a homegrown American version of fascism taking shape, built on racism, paranoia, and the promise of taking the country back. Then, in the 1930s, Germany elects Adolf Hitler. Suddenly, those ideas have a powerful, victorious role model. In the United States, you see new organizations appear. The Free Society of Teutonia, a small group of German immigrants praising Hitler from American soil. The Friends of New Germany, formed in 1933, openly pro-Nazi and encouraged by the German government to influence German Americans. They storm German-language newspapers in New York, demanding that editors publish pro-Nazi articles, and they try to make support for Hitler look like just another form of German pride. On the surface, they wave both the American flag and the swastika. Underneath, they preach that Jews, leftists, and un-American voices are enemies to be silenced. But these early groups are clumsy. They attract attention from the press, from politicians, and from the FBI. Some leaders are deported, others are told by Berlin to dissolve because they are doing more harm than good. Nazism in America becomes more organized with one name, the German-American Bund. Founded in 1936, the Bund models itself directly on Hitler's party. It builds lodges, beer halls, and newspapers. It runs summer camps for children with marching drills, Nazi symbols, and lessons in racial pride. You visit one of these camps in your mind. Cabins decorated with swastikas, American kids in shorts and uniforms, raising both the American flag and the Nazi flag in the morning. They sing songs in German and English, learning to see Nazism as compatible with real American values. In February 1939, the Bund fills Madison Square Garden with that massive rally you walked into at the beginning. Portraits of George Washington framed by swastikas, speakers calling Franklin D. Roosevelt a Jewish puppet, a crowd saluting, shouting, listening. For a moment, it looks like Nazism has found fertile ground in the United States. But even in that arena, something cracks. Outside, thousands of protesters clash with police to denounce the rally. Inside, a Jewish protester rushes the stage before being beaten and dragged away. America is watching, and many don't like what they see. Then history accelerates. 1939, World War II begins. 1941, Pearl Harbor is attacked. The illusion of being able to cheer for Hitler while living safely under the American flag collapses overnight. The day after Pearl Harbor, the German-American Bund votes to dissolve itself. Within days, U.S. agents raid their headquarters, seize records, and arrest dozens of leaders. Public opinion turns sharply. Nazi sympathy is no longer another political view, it is treason in the middle of a global war. Members of these groups face investigations, trials, and sometimes prison. Some try to melt back into ordinary society, denying what they once shouted in public. Others stay committed, just quieter, waiting for a future moment to resurface. On the surface, Nazism in America looks defeated. The fascist rallies are gone, the Bund is gone, and U.S. soldiers are now dying to destroy the very regime these groups admired. But ideas don't disappear just because organizations collapse. After the war, the horrors of the Holocaust become widely known. Images of liberated concentration camps make support for Nazism toxic in mainstream life. Yet, under that disgust, a smaller, harder core of believers refuses to let go. In 1959, a World War II veteran named George Lincoln Rockwell founds the American Nazi Party. He uses swastikas, uniforms, and explicit racist propaganda to keep Hitler's ideology alive on U.S. soil.
His group is small, but loud. They stage marches in Jewish neighborhoods. They carry signs praising Hitler and attacking Black Americans and Jews. They provoke fights to get media coverage, hoping that any attention is good attention. Rockwell is murdered in 1967, but his ideas do not die with him. They flow into later white supremacist groups and neo-Nazi networks, inspiring people who will never call themselves Bund members or American Nazis, but who carry similar beliefs. By the late 20th century and into the 21st, Nazism mutates. The National Alliance becomes one of the largest neo-Nazi organizations in the U.S. during the 1990s. Smaller groups like White Aryan Resistance and later Atomwaffen Division adopt terroristic strategies and move much of their organizing online. Some leaders focus less on rallies and more on decentralized cells, internet propaganda, and lone wolf attacks.
There are no more swastikas at Madison Square Garden, but in online forums, encrypted chats, and obscure corners of social media, the same core myth lives on. The idea that the nation belongs to a pure group and everyone else is a threat. You might wonder why you never learned any of this in school. How can a Nazi rally with 20,000 people in New York just vanish from memory? Historians and sociologists point to a few reasons. After World War II, the United States wanted a clean story. Democracy versus fascism, good versus evil. Admitting that tens of thousands of Americans cheered for Hitler complicates that story, so the memory gets pushed aside. Communities that hosted Bund camps or Nazi lodges often felt ashamed afterward and preferred not to talk about it. The result is dangerous. When people forget that fascist movements once had real support in their own country, they start to believe it can't happen here.
But the record says otherwise. Fascist groups grew fastest during times of fear, economic crisis, and social change. They blended nationalism with racism, claiming to be the real patriots. They used mass media, radio then, social media now, to normalize hate, one provocative piece of content at a time.
When you look back at the moment Nazism tried to rise in America, the important question isn't how many uniforms did they wear or how big were the rallies. The question is, what made so many people willing to listen in the first place? Because the architecture is always similar. A story of national humiliation and decline. A promise to restore greatness by targeting enemies within. A leader or movement that tells you your worst instincts are actually virtues. The first time, most Americans eventually rejected it. They watched what Nazism did in Europe and chose a different future. But the same emotional triggers, fear, anger, a desire for simple answers, still exist.
So when you hear someone say, "It can't happen here," you remember Madison Square Garden in 1939. You remember the camps with swastikas flying over American soil. And you understand that the only reason it failed last time is because enough people decided that being patriotic meant standing against it. Would you like me to adapt this script to second person with levels like your B2 video, or keep it more documentary style for your channel?